Hi everyone. Um, I think that there is a real chance that this summer, oh, we're in late summer now, but the next few weeks could be potentially a powder keg situation. Now, I don't want to exaggerate things. I don't want to get into hyperbole, but we have a situation where the protests around the hotels and migrants, it's not going anywhere in terms of, the issue is ongoing. The migrants aren't going to stop arriving. Um, the protests aren't going to stop. So I wonder where all this is going to lead. I'm quite concerned about effect on society, the potential of violence, um, the sort of tensions that are breaking out. Let me just say from the outset, I've never approached immigration with naivety. No country can take absolutely everyone. Um, Even though the UK is a big economy, our resources aren't finite, and obviously, British people must come first. British people should be prioritised in terms of resources, healthcare, etc. Um, but I don't think that this is an issue where there is any black and white solution that's straightforward. I mean, the right will say just stop all immigration. Okay, well, let's say that's the policy. Well, how do you actually do it? I mean, these people have shown that they're willing to risk their lives to get into the UK. So, what sort of deterrent effect is there going to be? It may be that there is processes in place to make the UK less appealing. Um, I've long been skeptical of the hotel model, i.e., putting migrants in hotels. I think there may be other facilities that are better suited. Because, for one thing, it gives the impression that they are kind of being pampered and they're in luxury. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But just the very idea it's a hotel, I think perhaps sends out the wrong message, particularly if it's a small town. I mean, it's not hard to understand why that would be a powder keg situation where you have people who are struggling, like British people, and they then resent this. However, I will say this right now, I do think there are some nefarious groups stoking up disinformation online. Without question, there's groups like Homeland involved. Now, they pretend to be just an kind of polite face of nationalism. I've looked at the website, and on the surface, there's nothing too sinister. They take right wing positions, but there's nothing there, for example, that can be called blood and soil nationalism. They don't get into any racial stuff, so they're playing it quite safe. But it has to be understood that Homeland is an offshoot of Patriotic Alternative, which is unquestionably a far right group. I don't trust Homeland. I think that there is a history of far right groups, changing their stripes to try and appear more socially acceptable. Um, I have absolutely no doubt that the same people who are organising Homeland now, 35 years ago, would have been in the National Front. I've no question. I've no doubt about that. It's just that they're savvy. They know what, will sell and what won't. And some of the stuff they're talking about on the surface sounds reasonable, controls on immigration. What reasonable person wouldn't want decent controls? But my suspicion about the likes of Homeland is the fact that they're an offshoot of Patriotic Alternative. Um, and the fact that disinformation is being stoked about, for example, crime around migrants now. I'm not saying that there is no problems with that. That would be wrong of me to say that. I think, particularly in smaller towns, there are migrants perhaps engaging in some criminal activities, and that is disgraceful. It's not exactly a way to show gratitude to a country that's given you shelter. Um, I think any migrant who is charged with a criminal offence and is guilty of that should be immediately deported. We don't want people in this country who are threatening society. That goes without saying. But I make no apology for saying that I think there is an ugly kind of lynch mob atmosphere with these protests, these so-called peaceful protests. Because that's the narrative. They're peaceful protests. Well, are they really peaceful? Put it this way: if in Epping or Islington or one of those other demonstrations, a migrant was to step out of the hotel whilst the demonstration was going on, and they happen to, walk past the demonstrators, are those people just going to, shout at them or angrily, disagree with them, or are they going to pose a physical threat to them? I think it's the latter. I really think if the police weren't there, there would be a real physical threat involved. And this isn't hot air. Last year, there were thugs threatening to burn down hotels with people inside. That cannot be just brushed aside. In Ballymena this year, rampaging mobs effectively went on a pogrom. They targeted innocent Filipino families because they were just foreigners. Initially, the allegations were against Romanians, but they targeted anyone, including Filipinos who were there legally. Um, the thing that I find really galling is they pretend to be all about the safety of women and girls. They hold up the placards, protect our children. Well, that's all well and good, but not all the migrants are male. A lot of them are, and that certainly raises questions. But in the case of Ballymena, there were female migrants, there were children involved, and the rampaging mob was threatening them. So how the hell do you protect women and girls by threatening women and girls? And frankly, this vilification of all male migrants, I have a problem with because it's a dehumanization thing. They're all rapists. They're all Islamists. They're all dangers to our society. I think some will be, but I read an interview in the Eye. I may be repeating myself here, but I think it's important. There was an Afghan man, and he had actually fled Afghanistan because the Taliban threatened him because he was promoting girls' education. The Taliban, of course, are back in power. What do you think they're going to do to Afghan men who are more moderate, who don't subscribe to their extreme Islamist ideology? They're going to be a threat. So I think it's a sad irony that they flee the Taliban, come to this country ostensibly for safety, and then they have to deal with a lynch mob. I mean, that's an awful thing. Um, I do think there is. I mean, I really want to say to the protesters, wait a second. If you were in their shoes, what would you do? If you were in Eritrea, which has lifetime conscription, not 1 or 2 years, lifetime conscription under brutal dictatorship. If you're in Afghanistan, which, as we know, was once again taken over by the Taliban. If you're in Syria, which continues to get severe sectarian violence, if you're in that sort of situation, of course you're going to want to get out. So I think that there is lack of empathy. I would say that, try and understand these people aren't trying to invade the UK. They're doing it because they're desperate. I mean, would they really risk their lives on the channel, knowing how many drownings there have been, knowing how flimsy those boats are if they were not desperate? And yes, there is the argument France is a safe country, other European countries are safe. But there's a range of reasons why they try to get to the UK. Um, I suppose you could argue that some of our policies are more lenient, but I think there's also other factors involved. Not least language. In many cases, migrants can speak English, but they can't speak French and other languages. So, from that point of view, being in the UK is more practical. Sometimes they have family members in the UK. In the case of the Afghans, there was a scandal recently regarding the leaks. Afghans worked with British forces, they risked their lives. Now, that leak, who's done it, whether someone in the. I think there's something very shady going on with that. I know that the SAS was under some allegations of abuses, and it seems to be that there may have been a rogue element in the SAS leaked this. May have been, we don't know this for sure. Sort of in revenge for investigations into their potential misconduct. Now that's appalling. That is basically putting those people at risk, people who work with British forces. Why? For no other reason than there was allegations against the SAS abusing their power. It seems to be that it was some sort of revenge thing. But anyway, those are the sort of situations where people become migrants. I'm not naive. There are definitely people who should not be here. But I don't accept that because, for instance, an Ethiopian man was arrested on suspicion of rape, that means that every single migrant is a rapist. And that's something that makes me very uncomfortable. The collective vilification, it's a powder keg. And I see the right wing tabloids fueling the flames. Farage is fueling the flames. This is not to say that there isn't a problem with criminality and migrants in small market town. And I think it's incredibly stupid for the Home Office to locate migrants in places like that. I think really this hotel model it's deeply, deeply flawed. They need to bring them to someone suggests, for example, former decommissioned military bases. That may be an option. I can't imagine the same sort of public reaction to military bases as there would be in hotels in towns and cities. So that model is clearly flawed, but I'm concerned. I'm concerned there's going to be more violence. I'm concerned that someone's going to get killed. Um, but I do have a problem with the lynch mob mentality. I think a lot of it's stoked by disinformation. Um, i.e., you'll get the likes of Homeland, they'll say, girls have been raped here, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but they won't bother to check that that information is accurate. Then people will get concerned because they obviously want their daughters to be safe. And then the migrants are, the target. Um, it's interesting that you don't get this sort of mob mentality when British guys are arrested for rape. It's not the same sort of thing. So I do see a vilification going on, and it does not sit well with me. I've known a few migrants, not well, but I've spoke to them, and the impression I get is not people who are, rabid Islamists who hate this country. Some will be, and they shouldn't be here. But we're not. The small boat situation is not going to end. So migrants are going to come here. I think that they need to be. I think the thing about decommissioned military bases may be an idea. Send them there. Give them basic supplies, food, etc. But they have come illegally, and they themselves need to understand that just because we are a big economy doesn't mean we have finite resources. I think there's a deep naivety on the part of the migrants. They seem to think that when they come here, it's kind of we're going to open them with open arms, welcome them with open arms. Um, well, if you're in a hotel and there's a lynch mob gathered outside, that's going to be a very different perception. I make no apology for calling them a lynch mob because I don't think they're peaceful. I think, given half a chance, if the police weren't there, they would try to force their way into the hotel and do real harm to the people inside. And nothing justifies that sort of mentality. It just doesn't. I mean, if someone has committed an offence, they should be arrested, punished, and deported. But nothing justifies saying, oh, they're all rapists, let's just target all of them. That's what I have a big problem with. Um, but I think it is exacerbated in places where there's already pre existing social tensions or in small rural towns we have a big influx of people. It's going to be a shock to society. It's going to be that is going to breed tensions. So the Home Office is making a mess of this. This hotel model needs to be changed drastically. Otherwise, the police have limited numbers. They can only do so much. I see a situation where something really bad happens. I'm also aware that it's been left wing counter protesters, and I'm not going to say they have behaved entirely responsibly either. Some of them have covered their faces and also behaved in an aggressive way. But I've seen ridiculous claims that all the trouble is from left wing provocateurs trying to make the right look bad. Uh, if you are outside a hotel and you're demanding that it be burned to the ground, do not tell me that you're peaceful. And even if that isn't specifically what they've been saying in these protests, they're coming from pretty much the same disinformation and ideology as the violence last year and the violence in Ballymena. It may be that they're slightly more moderate. They're not chanting for death the same way that we saw, but it's a powder keg situation, and I'm concerned about it. I guess my concern, being very close to the Ukrainian people, is that there may be a fatigue with supporting the Ukrainians. Then the mentality will turn on them, and that would be definitely there's a lot of women and children involved in that. I'm not saying that's about to happen anytime soon, and I sincerely hope it doesn't. But the thing is with this mentality, I mean, we saw in Ballymena, they didn't care who they were targeting as long as they were outsiders. Romanians, Filipinos, they didn't care. So what's to say that there won't be trouble that will then escalate and Ukrainians are targeted? Even though most Britons support the Ukrainians and they, see that as morally justified in helping that, that was a unique situation. It was in Europe. It was a country that was invaded. I'm just very concerned that um, nefarious groups will continue stoking up disinformation. There'll continue to be these tensions, and it concerns me. So finally, people could say I'm a naive leftist. I don't think I am. I'm clearly saying that we should have controls on this. I'm clearly saying that we can't support everyone. I'm clearly saying that people who have committed criminal offences should be deported. Fine. I'm fine with all of that. What I have a problem with is the lynch mob mentality and then absurdly claiming it's peaceful. It's not peaceful. It's not peaceful if you're threatening to harm other people. I don't care who they are. That is not peaceful. I support their right to peacefully protest if it actually is peaceful, but it's not peaceful. That's the point. And then they complain about the fact the police are there. Well, given what happened last year, if the police weren't there, I have no doubt, probably not everyone in the group, but there will be some extremists who will try to set it on fire or try to do serious harm to those inside. I'm not saying every single person in these protests is a far right extremist, and I know people get really this knee jerk defensiveness about that. But unquestionably, there is far right influence. Homeland, far right group, is involved. There's just no question about that. And I get it. They're the polite face of the far right. If you look at their website, they don't look particularly sinister. They don't look particularly. But I really think if you dig beneath the surface, I absolutely wouldn't trust groups like that. I think, they just keep changing the colors. They're chameleons. I think they are all cut from the same cloth. I don't trust them. Um, that's how I see it. Let me know your thoughts.